All righty. Good afternoon, guys. I'm very excited for this part two because part one was absolutely amazing. I appreciate all the amazing the amazing feedback for part one. It was outstanding. We learned a whole lot. I uh, I kind of held us off because we were on a roll, I know, but the Vietnam experience that Mr. James has is so unique and so interesting to hear about. I thought it was going to be great to just hold off for part two and cover Vietnam in a whole episode. But before I hand it off to him, I wanted to remind you guys just a little promotion uh, for Mr. Rick. His books are linked into the show notes. All you do is click under the by the way, like and share, please, but click under there and you can get the Google link or the Amazon link, I should say, to all four of the books: book one, book two, book three, and book four. And this covers his time from literally joining, his time at Bragg, his time on an A team in Africa, Vietnam, all of his training, all of his fun stories, like meeting Colonel Maggie, all of the fun stuff. So I recommend getting it. Mine are on the way. Those of y'all always asking about my books and what books are good. His books are good. Grab those books. So without further ado, thank you, Mr. Dick, for joining us today. We're always glad to have you. And I'm going to hand it off to you and let us get started on Vietnam today.
Okay. Well, I volunteered for Vietnam, and it took me a while to finally get to go because everybody said they were too short-handed for me to go to Vietnam and leave their unit. So I called up Mrs. Alexander at the Pentagon. She was our representative, and I asked her to please put me on an emergency list for Vietnam. And within a couple of days, she had me going through pre deployment training for Vietnam. The That came on my last, actually, before my last day as a man on a traveling team to talk about special forces. We had a 12-man team and we traveled about. And the last place we were at was the Texas State Fair in Dallas for a week, telling everybody what we did in special forces. So I finally got my recommendation to go to Vietnam. And I began my pre deployment training in November of 1965. And it consisted of 4 hours of Vietnamese language training daily, as well as 4 hours of miscellaneous subjects on Vietnam. And the people they had teaching it were men who had already been in Vietnam and were very experienced at it. So the training went very well. I began in January of 1966. I began my 30-day pre deployment leave. I went home to San Jose, California, where my parents lived, and spent my pre deployment leave there. In February 5th, my pre deployment leave was over, and my parents drove me to Oakland Army Terminal. I reported there for next day, busing to Travis Air Force Base to fly to Vietnam. On the 6th, our group was transported to Travis Air Force Base, where we loaded on a chartered commercial Boeing 707 for the trip over to Vietnam. We touched down on the 8th in Vietnam at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. And we touched down pretty hard because it was a combat area, and the crew on the commercial aircraft did not want to spend much time on the ground there. They wanted to spend the least amount possible. I was sent to Flight Operations Center to find a flight to Canto. Before that, I was flown to Nha Trang, where Fifth Group headquarters was, and went through close to a week of training there before going to Canto. When I found out I was going down to Fourth Corps, I tried to get in Project Delta, which had just started up. I had a friend there, and I thought, because I had heard that Fourth Corps, where Canto was was kind of iffy, that they didn't have much going on. Well, I found out differently when I got to Canto. I asked them, in fact, to put me on the A team that was the busiest and had the most going on. And they sent me to Kai Kai. Kai Kai was a maximum of 6 months there because it was such a dangerous camp. I was able to get a hop to Kai Kai, also known as Dan Chu on the map. I was assigned there as the assistant intelligence sergeant. I flew to Kai Kai via a de Havilland U-1A Otter, and it was the weekly mail run that Otter made. It was a 2-hour flight. The team immediately changed my assignment to that of a team demolition sergeant, with a secondary assignment as assistant intelligence sergeant. I had been trained in special forces as a demolition man, so that was the training that I got before going over to Vietnam. The day after I arrived, I went on my first combat patrol, and it was a goodie. They had about 100 Vietnamese CIDG go with 3 of us special forces men. And we went south of camp along the Kai Kai River. During that patrol, we were involved in 3 separate firefights. And unknowingly, I stepped on what we called a toe popper. It meant that it would damage your foot. And when I stepped on it, the Vietnamese man behind me came running up to me because I didn't know I had stepped on it. He came up running to me and motioned me back, and he showed me where my boot had bridged the pressure plate on that mine. Therefore, the mine did not go off. And being the demolition sergeant, it was my responsibility to very shakily destroy that mine, blow it up in place. So that was my first patrol out of Kai Kai. On March 1st, I accompanied a patrol of about 150 CIDG. CIDG was Civilian Irregular Defense Group. It was the Vietnamese that we worked with. So on the first, I went on a patrol again down the Kai Kai River. The Kai Kai River was a very busy area. It was loaded with Viet Cong. I carried on that one, I carried an AN PRC-10 radio. The first patrol I went on, I had carried an M79, but this time I carried the AN PRC-10 radio. It weighed about 26 pounds and was carried on the back, and the antenna stuck up. So I considered that antenna to be kind of like an aiming stake, saying to the Viet Cong, "This is a guy that talks to the Air Force that comes in to help out. Get him." Okay. This time we were involved in two fights with the enemy. We had them deep in VC territory, and that was just 3 miles south of camp. This was the first and the only time that we were able to call in and get American Air Force aircraft to come. Usually, when we called in for aircraft air support, it would be the Vietnamese Air Force. And you had to worry about them hitting you as well as the enemy because they flew Sky Raiders and they tended to drop the bombs at a high altitude where they wouldn't get shot, whereas the U.S. Air Force came right down to the ground. And they came with napalm as well as bombs. So it was quite a show. In fact, when they dropped their napalm, I felt it across the river. It was that hot. And they also had 20 millimeter machine guns. In the village there, we found medical supplies in the VC first aid station there in that village. The medical supplies had signs on them, and the sign said, "Donated to the Viet Cong freedom fighters by the students of Stanford University." That was the first time I knew Stanford was giving stuff to the Viet Cong. And from there on, I hated Stanford University. Stanford University was in Palo Alto, California, very close to where I lived. We didn't have much storage space for food. There were a few hundred CIDG in our camp at Kai Kai, and only 12 of us Americans. And we were sent very little food, and we had very limited space to keep food that had to be kept fresh. I always made sure that I finished my meal first. That was so that I would guarantee getting seconds. One of the guys on the team came out and said, "Well, it's no wonder he always gets seconds because he doesn't eat his food, he slurps it down." That is where I got the nickname of SLURP. And that nickname held on throughout my time in Vietnam, as well as up until now. The camp on the 7th was shelled by the Viet Cong, and we returned fire with our 81 millimeter and 4.2 inch mortars. The melee lasted for 3 hours. I was the gunner on the 4 Deuce, and the reason I was is because I had also been trained on heavy weapon in the States. My advanced individual training, in fact, after basic was on heavy weapons. So I got to know recoilless rifles and mortars very well. So they made me a gunner for our 4 Deuce mortar. And I was out there the whole time with no t-shirt on at all, no top. and I got one heck of a good uh, sun bathing. I got red. I got sunburned. On the 12th, this again is still March. On the 12th of March, we had a visit from none other but General Westmoreland. And he had an entourage with him. The person I liked most in his entourage was Archie Moore. Archie was a a, a fighter, a boxer, and he had a really good reputation. And he brought with him some frozen Foremost ice cream and gave it to us. And I tell you what, we had a blast eating all of that ice cream. On the 20th, now, one thing we had at Kai Kai is right across the border, we had a Cambodian outpost. That outpost every other weekend would target us, and they would bracket our camp with what happened to be a big artillery piece. And it wounded two of our soldiers. Now, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. We decided after they wounded two of our soldiers, of the Vietnamese, that we were going to get even. So we got a bunch of guys, volunteers, to get together that night and sneak across the border into Cambodia. Now, we weren't supposed to be in Cambodia at that time because Cambodia was basically off limits, but we never reported to anybody that we had made that trip across the border to where the Cambodian outpost was. And we had one of the guys with a recoilless rifle, and he fired on that outpost, raising hell. At the same time, I was busy on the 4 deuce mortar firing at that same outpost. And the guys on the patrol in Cambodia would tell me uh, how to change the deflection on the mortar to be able to exactly hit that outpost. So we hit them pretty hard that time. On the 22nd, our new medic, Passmore, Ed Passmore, went on a patrol with me. We got hit hard by the VC, and I immediately called in for support. We held out for half an hour before 100-man relief force arrived from camp. Now, I had I had this way of making sure that the Vietnamese that were with us would move when I wanted them to. I would stand up, making myself a target for the Viet Cong to get my CIDG troops to move because they were afraid that if I got wounded, that they'd catch some shit for it. The people that came to support us were led by an aspirant. The Vietnamese aspirant is the same as an American warrant officer. And while that firefight was going for another 2 hours, he was wounded, and he was wounded bad enough where we had to get him medevaced out. So when we returned to camp, Passmore told everybody that I was crazy And that was because I would stand up and make myself a target to get the people to move. But it worked. That same night, we had an unidentified aircraft fly over the camp, and it never contacted us. So we had heard rumors about Cambodians having an air force or having a few aircraft across the border. So we got the impression that because they didn't contact us, that it must have been a Cambodian aircraft flying over us. So we got in touch with higher headquarters. We told them about it. And we finally told them, okay, we're giving them 15 minutes to contact us. And if they don't, we're firing at them using our 50 caliber machine gun that was in the camp tower. Thankfully, a couple minutes before that time was up, they radioed back to us and said that it was an American Mohawk aircraft that was doing uh, radar surveillance over in our camp area. So we decided not to fire on them, and we were thankful that they said that it was our aircraft. Later that evening, we spotted some VC just outside our camp. Some noise had been heard by one of our sentries. So a couple of us went to the wall carrying our rifles with a night vision sight. Now, that night vision sight was something that was really something else. It could see people in the wire and at a fairly long distance away. We fired on the people and they ran. The following morning, we went out to the perimeter and we found that the VC had cut the electrical wires to our illumination devices. So they had snuck inside our outer barrier of barbed wire. On the 27th, I went out on another patrol with 15 CIDG and two other SF. We got hit with small arms, automatic, and mortar fire, about 20 rounds. 3 of the mortar rounds detonated within 50 to 100 feet of me, one of them close enough to get me to dive headfirst into the ground. We were in an open field when we got hit. Most of the area around Kaikai, in fact, was open field, so there wasn't much space to hide. Early in the firefight, the VN patrol leader got hit in the chest. We tried to get a relief force from camp, but this time they refused, saying it would be too dangerous, so we didn't get a relief force. We were receiving heavy shelling from Cambodian outposts at the same time we were in our firefight. We finally managed to break contact and retreat, carrying the wounded with us. On April 1st, a few days later, I went on R&R. That was a bad time to go on R&R. I missed all sorts of action at our camp. I had 4 days of drinking with nothing else to do. And in the morning of the 1st, I loaded on the Milk Run Otter and proceeded back home to Kaikai. I went on patrol on the 3rd, I went on patrol with 12 CIDG, including what I considered to be our trusted interpreter. We got up near the border, stopped, and spread out. Sergeant Noakes was our heavy weapons sergeant. he said that he was going to go up to the Cambodian border or close to it and reconnoiter the border area while I stayed with the troops. Not long after he departed, all hell broke loose. We were hit with rifle, machine gun, mortar, and recoilless rifle fire. We were in an open field, totally exposed. The CIDG retreated towards camp, leaving Noakes and I alone because I didn't know where Noakes was. And I knew I didn't dare run because he was out there by himself. Noakes and I finally hooked up and proceeded to head back towards camp. On our way back from camp, we heard that our commanding officer had been killed while he was in the tower. What had happened is I had made radio contact with him and told him about what was happening with us. And he went up on the tower to be able to direct the fire onto the enemy. And one of the Cambodian artillery rounds exploded right in front of him on that tower. So it killed him. It killed him immediately. On the 8th, we all flew, all but two of us flew to Canto for his memorial service. After the service, we were authorized a few hours to ourselves before returning to camp. Almost all of us went to Canto to the Green Door Bar, a well-known special forces hangout in Canto. We got shit-faced in a big way. How we all managed to return to the airfield, who knows? On the return flight to Kai, as the pilot was approaching camp, he radioed the camp that he would need camp personnel to help unload the team, as we were in no shape to do it ourselves. On the 14th, I went on a patrol that ended up being a dry run, my first dry run in a dozen patrols. That same day, Noakes departed for a new assignment. And I found out later that he was promoted to lieutenant. Our new CO, Captain Joseph Cincotti, who is very famous with Special Forces men at Fort Bragg back then. He arrived as our new CO to replace the CO that was killed. Sometime during that month, we received an experimental radar unit with 4 men TDY from the States to operate it. In fact, all 4 men were from the 3rd Special Forces Group, and they had training on operating this radar unit. In the early afternoon, numerous on the 26th, in the early afternoon, we had numerous Huey helicopters approach our camp. A couple of helicopter gunships circled the camp looking for possible VC on the ground. While the gunships circled, the remainder of the Hueys came in and touched down on the dirt landing strip just outside the front gate of Kai. Some of us, Special Forces and CIDG, jumped into the aircraft, quickly finding a place to sit. As soon as all the aircraft were loaded, we lifted off, beginning our flight to detachment A430 and then A425, Thung Toi. was the name of that camp. The purpose for this flight was for us to fly to nearby camps and then remain overnight, and the next morning make a heliborne assault south of the camp. Before our arrival, one of A425's assault boats had been sent to Tan Chau to get some bulldozer parts. Shortly after we arrived, while returning from Tan Chau, the boat motor failed, leaving it dead in the water. It was then ambushed by VC while it floated. 3 occupants, Sergeant Baumert, an interpreter, and the Filipino technical representative operating the boat, went into the water. The Filipino's body was quickly recovered, but Sergeant Brent Baumert and the interpreter were listed as MIA, and their bodies were later found. Thinking the attack was a setup for a larger ambush of release forces, the 4th Corps Mike Force was sent out from Don Fuc. Don Fuc was a camp that was closest to where Kai Kai was. It was between Kai Kai and where we were. Another company of CIDG from A425 with SF advisors was sent on a scrounged LCM, which landed at the site. We volunteered to join that particular relief patrol, but we were told no, that we couldn't. We had to remain there so we could go out on the next morning's flight for the assault. We took off from Thung Toi and flew towards Kai Kai. As we neared the assault area, the chopper pilot dropped down to just above ground level, and then the pilot gave us a thumbs up signal to get ready. As soon as we felt the bump of the skids hitting the ground, we jumped out of the bird on both sides. Weapons switched from safe to auto and at the ready, and immediately formed into small groups. As soon as we jumped off the aircraft, however, we knew we had not landed in a hot DZ. There was no firing at all. And the only thing I figured was, because that area was usually filled with VC, that because all of those aircraft were flying around Kai Kai at that time, that the Viet Cong probably figured it was going to be an attack by us. On May 2nd, the rainy season began with a flourish. SFC Allard and our medic told Sergeant Thompson and I to go to Saigon or Canto for a week to get some R&R. We missed a lot of action while we were gone. The day after we left Kai Kai, the camp was shelled, thankfully with no casualties. 2 days later, a caribou had been making a Lolex drop. A Lolex drop is when the aircraft flies, it has the rear down and it has a load inside the caribou with a parachute attached to it. It flies over the area where they want to do the drop, and the parachute pulls the load out the back end. And the load is kind of on a wooden platform, whereby it slides on the ground after it comes out of the aircraft itself. Well, what happened was the load popped in the back of the Caribou with the parachute deployed already. It caused the aircraft to slow down to where it couldn't fly anymore. And the aircraft crashed in our minefield. Many of the men on the team saw it happen and they immediately went into the minefield to save anybody who was just injured, not killed. It ended up that the two men in the back of the aircraft were killed because the load went forward after the aircraft crashed and pinned them against the bulkhead and killed them immediately. The pilot and the co-pilot were pulled out, but were pretty much wounded uh, from fire because of a fire had started in the cockpit. I was able to talk to one of those pilots a few years after that at home, and he told me that the other pilot was pretty much injured and didn't want to do anything, especially not fly anywhere. In June, Sergeant Passmore, returned from a short R&R in Saigon. He had with him a leopard cat that he had purchased in Saigon for $9 American. Shortly after the cat arrived, we decided we had to make the cat airborne. So we fired a 4-deuce mortar uh, illumination round, which had a parachute on it. We made sure to set the mortar very high so the mortar would land close to the camp so we could get out there and get the parachute before it burned up. And then after we got that parachute, we made a harness for the cat. And then what we did was we took the cat with the harness and the parachute up to the top of our observation tower, which was about 30 feet high. And we dropped him out of the tower. And one of the guys, or I mean, not one of them, several of the guys were on the ground with a blanket, and we caught the cat in the blanket. We had that cat make 3 jumps from the tower, and then we managed to pin paratrooper wings on the harness that the cat wore. So we officially made the cat airborne qualified. On the 21st, I was evacuated on an Army Huey to Canto due to a problem with my left leg. The doctor in Canto diagnosed it as a blood clot and told me I would be hospitalized for at least a month. I was sent to Canto to the hospital, and I was finally released a couple of weeks later and sent to the C team in Canto. Well, after I arrived in Canto, the doctor there said I wasn't fully healed, so I was sent back to Saigon again, where I was sent to the hospital to heal some more. While I was there, I tried to C4 decided to transfer me to another A team. I tried my best to get sent to the 4th Corps Mike Force, but no amount of pleading would get me to that Mike Force. I was released from the hospital again and returned to Canto. I took a flight to Kai Kai on a Huey to pick up all my belongings to take to Vinja. Once again, the C team ordered me to go to Saigon. I ended up going to Saigon and went to Camp Goodman rather than the hospital. Camp Goodman had a great bar in it. So I spent a whole week inside that bar. On the 21st, I went back to the hospital and was finally released. I took a Huey flight to Vinja and was assigned to be the demolition sergeant there, replacing a good friend of mine, Sergeant Stannard, who had been killed at one of Vinja's outposts. He was a fellow demolition man, and he had gone out into the wire at Jantan, and he didn't realize that one of the grenades in the wire in the perimeter had been sabotaged. He was out there to check all of our defensive things in the perimeter, and he got to that hand grenade, and it detonated, and it killed him immediately. Shortly after I arrived at camp, in fact, a mere 6 days afterwards, I was sent to Jantan. Jantan was a camp that I learned to hate. Jantan had only 2 Americans there. It was a very small outpost. And we knew that the village of Jantan, right outside of the outpost, was mainly Viet Cong sympathizers in that village. So I was there as the demolition sergeant. I began feeling bad. And by the 7th, it became very painful for me to breathe. The American there with me tried his best to make contact with the people at Vinja, but he couldn't get through to the radio operator at Vinja. Finally, a couple of days later, when I was really suffering, he managed to get the radio operator at Tin Bin, which was even beyond where Vinja was. And he told the radio operator at Tin Bin to please contact our radio operator and tell him to have the camp immediately send our barge down to Jantan to replace me so I could be medevaced out of the camp there. Well, I was finally medevaced and went to the hospital at Saigon. They found out that I had pneumonia. I was there for about a week before the staff made a mistake of authorizing me a 2-day pass. I made that. I went to Camp Goodman for my pass and loved it. I drank myself happy. And when I returned to the hospital, I I ticked off the nurses because I was just drunk and didn't even talk nice to them when I got back to the hospital after Camp Goodman. I was finally discharged on the 21st and hopped onto the daily Caribou headed to C4 in Canto. An hour later, I couldn't find a flight out to Vinja, so I went to the NCO club and got drunk. The next day, I finally hopped on a helicopter that went to Vinja. 3 days after I got out to Vinja, Master Sergeant Burns, who had been the camp sergeant, team leader, departed for home. I was selected to take over as the intelligence sergeant for the team. And SFC Richard, who had been the second NCO in command, was promoted to team sergeant. I was now the demolition sergeant, unofficial heavy weapons leader, supply sergeant, clerk typist. The clerk typist was because the team had found out that I was a very good typist. So they made me the team typist. I had to alter my sleep time to 4 hours a night because I had so much to do as a team sergeant, or as the intel sergeant, and the other jobs that I had. On the 27th, we finally got some action at night. Vinja had been very inactive because there weren't very many VC there, although they had an area between Jantan and Vinja that was an area that the VC used to enter into Vietnam from Cambodia. The action we got was a short, very short, half-hour long probing attack of the camp, and there wasn't much to it. A few days later, I typed and submitted my voluntary 6-month extension in Vietnam. That would extend my tour from 1 year to a year and a half. And by the way, my dog is whining. I need to let him out. I'm sorry.
That's
I'm going to
fine,
have to
sir.
take a short
It
break.
it's fine. Go ahead. We're fine. We'll hold it on until you get here.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, don't worry about it. It's fine.
Okay, JJ, let's go.
We gotta give him a little bit of credit here. Sadly, Mr. Mr. Rick lost his wife, and it's sad he's having to take care of the dogs and all that by himself. And he's got a good puppy that's always with him. see them all the time on Facebook. If y'all follow Mr. Rick, you'll see his dog's always with him. He's a good man. I respect the hell out of him. He's a good man. Um, Yep, he's got a little bit more to share, and you guys start getting some questions ready. I've already got photos that we'll go through, and after that, we'll just see what we get to. But I've got some good photos and all of that we can ask him about, and especially about the cat getting airborne qualified. I do have those photos. Yep, absolutely. Linda was the War Department. Um, I didn't get to meet her personally, but I did speak to her when I would speak to Mr. Rick, and she definitely was. She was an outstanding woman, and I hate she's not no longer with us. She was a hell of a lady.
Okay, I'm back.
Righty, where you just pick up where you left off. We're here.
Okay. Like I said, I typed up my voluntary 6 months extension in country. And at that time, they had a bill that was going to give a free 30-day leave to anybody who extended in country. So I was kind of looking forward to that. On the 7th, I finally went on a combat patrol, my first in 2.5 months. There was a night ambush departing at 1900 hours and returning at 0700 hours in the morning. Almost all of the operations I took part in fact, at that time, were night ambushes because that's the way we could catch the Viet Cong off guard. The only enemy we encountered on this ambush were Viet Cong mosquitoes, and they were thick. On the 9th, Sergeant or Spec 4 Stevens, who was our medic, and I took a half-hour ride on a Huey back to my favorite place in hell, Jantan. The elections were scheduled in Vietnam at about that time. And it was kind of rumored that there was going to be a lot of terrorism going on in the country because of that election, but they didn't happen. So I sat in Jantan the whole time with just Spec 4 Stevens with me and bored stiff. On the 20th, I returned to Vinja by boat to spend a week strengthening Vinja's defenses and placing out more electronically operated claymore mines, because those were some of our best defensive mechanisms. The main part of Camp Vinja, was under 4 feet of water. It was the monsoon season in Vietnam. Now, at the same time that we got 4 feet of water, I heard about Kai Kai being totally underwater. In fact, they had to put a second story on the places where they stayed at Kai Kai because the water was that deep. One of the worst things that happened at Kai Kai was when they built that place. They used bulldozers and they bulldozed the camp berm from inside the camp, making inside the camp deeper than outside of camp. So that made it the same as a bathtub. The rain just stayed there. And I actually saw some photographs of some of the guys swimming to get to the mortar emplacement that was on a raft. So that was nasty news. And in fact, in Vinja, the water was within 4 inches of flooding the camp itself, our team house. On the 26th, which was 6 days later, I returned to Jantan by boat. Things were pretty bad at Jantan. It would have been hard to defend the outpost at the time because the entire outpost was underwater, including the helipad. Movement within the outpost had to be by sampan. That was the only way to get around in that outpost. By 0100 hours of the second, the water was 3 inches from the team house floor at Jantan and was several feet above ground level. It was pouring outside. We expected the floor to be underwater by the end of the day. By this time, the team house floor at Vinja was definitely underwater, under about 2 feet of water, in fact. And all the camp defensive positions were flooded and unusable. I had 6 inches of water in my room. There was 8 inches in the dining room, as well as 1.5 feet of water in our kitchen. October 7th. What a birthday. That was my birthday. When I slept, the mosquito netting was tightly tucked under the mattress to keep the snakes out of my bed because we had snakes swimming around in the bedroom. Finally, on the 15th, the water receded enough so that the floors of the team house were above the water. On November 5th, because I had requested and been authorized a 6-month extension in country, I was authorized a 30-day leave. On the 5th, I submitted a request for that leave, selecting my home in San Jose, California. On the 16th, Staff Sergeant Hunter, our team medic, and I went on an operation. We went to an ambush near the Cambodian border, which was about 2,000 feet away from the camp. The weather was so bad that the only living things braving the conditions were the leeches, the always present mosquitoes, our ambush party, and hopefully, our browser has lost connection.
Your camera has gone out. We can
Huh?
still hear you, but we've
Okay.
lost visual from you, but we can hear you.
Yeah. I don't know what happened. Okay. Let's see. Uh, well, okay. Uh, on the 19th, I went on another night ambush near the border. This one with Staff Sergeant Smith, who was the radio operator supervisor. The water was still pretty high outside of camp, so we went to the ambush site in sampans and set up the ambush positions in the sampans since there was no dry ground on which to set up. Smitty and I were on a special mortar, 60 millimeter mortar, and machine gun sampan. It was a moonlit night, and the VC had seen our silhouettes. They fired on us. Our sampan became bogged down in thick rice in head-deep water, and there was nowhere to go. Wooden sampans are not very good at stopping bullets. We ducked, but that was more reactive than practical. We tried to return fire, but weren't able to determine where they were firing from. It was the only time I ever felt really helpless in Vietnam. We tried to move the boat, but finally decided to sit tight for fear they would be trying to lure us into moving into an ambush killing site. And the last thing I wanted to do was jump into the water because the water was no place to be when there were mortars exploding in the water. We finally got out of the ambush safely. On December 12th, we were down to only 3 men in Vinja, with a mandatory guard roster of at least one special forces awake through the night. Sleep was a thing of the past. 4 hours of sleep a day was normal for us. That night, a VC was seen crawling through the perimeter wires at Jantan during the night. A firefight ensued with no reported casualties on either side. One of our patrols was ambushed by VC in plain sight of the camp at Vinja. That was the bravest they had been in all my time at Vinja. The ambush resulted in 2 CIDG killed, 1 wounded, and 1 missing in action. Our patrol killed at least 1 VC. On the 16th of December, Sergeant, he had just been promoted, Stevens, the medic, and I headed down to Jantan again. But this time it wasn't going to be boring. We received intelligence that the VC were going to attack Jantan and overrun it prior to the 1st of January. So daylight hours down there were feverish with work being done, all to strengthen the camp defenses as much as possible. CIDG soldiers were sleeping at their positions. We were at the highest possible alert status. That was confirmed by several acts of sabotage within the camp that we had enemy among us. We always considered in Vietnam, in fact, that at least 10% of our camp personnel were Viet Cong sympathetic. And in fact, some of them were Viet Cong that had become CIDG, but were Viet Cong sympathetic. So we always had to watch our back anytime we were in camp. On the 22nd, I received a letter from headquarters with orders. I had been promoted to staff sergeant as of the 8th of December, 2 weeks prior. I also received some survival equipment that I had ordered from home. I was now ready to survive in case of an emergency, such as the camp being overrun. I made a survival kit out of the newly received equipment. My kit consisted of a map, flashlight, tiny cook set with heat tablets, inflatable life vest, survival food, and waterproof matches in a waterproof container with a striking surface for the matches. On the 25th of December, Christmas, it definitely was not joy to the world. It sucked big time. Our Christmas dinner was sea rations, since all our other food had spoiled. On the 1st of January, the terms of a Johnson-McConnell agreement of 1966 turned over the Army transport de Havilland CV-2 Caribou to the United States Air Force. The Army no longer had the Caribous. And that's what our camps usually used for reinforcements. And now we didn't have them. What happened was, with the McConnell agreement, we were able to at least get helicopters armed, which we hadn't been able to do before that. We gave up our Caribous for armed helicopters. On the 24th of January, I arrived in Saigon to catch a plane home for my R&R. I caught the first commercial charter aircraft out of Saigon. It was a Saturn Airlines DC-7, a prop job. We flew all the way to the United States on that prop job, and it took forever to get there. On the 22nd of February, Mom and Dad took me to Travis Air Force Base to get my flight back to Vietnam. Sure as shooting, the aircraft I got on was in the same Saturn Airlines DC-7 prop job. So it took me forever to get back to Vietnam. On the 24th, I arrived in Basw, just outside of Saigon, staying overnight at my favorite place, Camp Goodman. I hopped a flight. The next day, I hopped a flight northbound and checked into headquarters at Nha Trang. The next day, I returned to Saigon to meet with Sergeant Green, our team light weapons sergeant at Camp Goodman, to help him with the chow run for our camp. On the 4th of March, both of us hopped on an Air Force C-7A Caribou at Saigon for a flight to the C team at Canto, where we remained overnight and drank a few. The next day, we flew to Vientiane and hit Huey with a load of food for the team. A week later, the Special Forces Group Communication Center, 5th Special Forces Group Communication Center, began operating a Mars net. With this net, it was possible to make radio contact with ham radio operators in the States, patching radio contacts into the phone system. That way, troops in Vietnam could actually talk to relatives at home. On the 19th, our intelligence sergeant, Sergeant First Class Counselor, went to the trying for a while. And since SFC Blaylock, who was our operations sergeant, was a Jantan, I became the team sergeant and intelligence sergeant again. It left us extremely short-handed. In March, our camp was credited with 6 VC killed in action and 2 wounded in action. Colonel Kelly personally congratulated us for our operations and our kills. VC activity had increased during the month. In fact, one of the things we did was we captured when we killed those VC, we captured the flag and kept it at the camp. And we also captured some good weapons. On April 10th, the team was so short-handed and pressed for time to accomplish our jobs that we decided to return Staff Sergeant Smith and Sergeant Green from the FOB at Jantan and have Jantan go without any Americans from then on. That was the first time since I arrived at Vinja that Jantan didn't have any Americans there. Shortly after returning to Vinja, Sergeant Green passed out and had to be medevac to the hospital in Saigon. He had suffered from heat exhaustion. He returned sooner than expected. And we learned that the reason he returned sooner than expected is because he escaped the hospital and came back to our camp, even though they didn't want to release him. On the 29th, Sergeant Smith, Smitty as we call him, went on another week-long chow run for the team. Now, Smitty was our scrounger, and he did a great job of being a scrounger. He could go to Saigon with next to nothing and trade it for food that he brought back to our camp free. And he did a great job of that, believe me. May 12th, our team departed Vinja in the evening to participate in Operation Blackjack 41 Charlie, aka Blackjack 41 White. Captain Morris, Sergeant Gilchrist, our head medic, and I deployed with a company of our CIDG to be part of a blocking force for that particular operation. We went south towards the Seven Mountains because the Seven Mountains was where the operation was going to be. Another company led by Lieutenant Tomlinson, our XO, and Spec 4 Evac, our new medic, was the attacking force from the south. We had moved out of camp ostensibly to set up a night ambush, but instead set up a blocking force for the following morning. The target was Nuijai. The next day at 6:45 in the morning, Special Forces, 39 Special Forces in fact, and 3 companies of the 5th Special Forces Group Mobile Strike Force out of Natram parachuted from 6 C-130 Hercules Air Force cargo craft 700 feet above the ground onto the drop zone, which was known as drop zone Blackjack, which was at the south of the mountain. In June, on the 24th, I was on a reaction force out of Finja to cut off a retreating VC force. You might know the VC changed directions and got away. They were reported to have 2 Caucasians with them, possibly American POWs. And in fact, one of my good friends and teammates, it was one of his friends that was one of those American POWs that was with that unit. On the 30th of June, we turned over Vinja to the Vietnamese as part of the beginning, actually, of all of the CIDG camps being turned over to the Vietnamese. On July 1st, the following day, I was assigned to Detachment B-42, Chow Duck, as a radio operator. Then on August 1st, thankfully, I was assigned to Detachment A-429 at Basw as a demolition sergeant. I had gotten very tired of just being a communicator at the B team because where we had the communication set up was in the basement of the camp headquarters. And that was boring as could be. I couldn't see anything. Basw was what I had asked for. And thankfully, our commanding officer from Vinja, who had been assigned to Basw also, was able to talk the commanding officer there to let me go to Basw for my last month in camp and in Vietnam, in fact. I was assigned as a demolition sergeant. Lieutenant Tomlinson, who was my XO at Vinja, was also the XO at Basw, and he helped me to get there. Basw was a Special Forces Advanced fighting camp. It was tasked with the mission of providing security for the area Cambodian and Vietnamese villages, as well as interdicting VC supply and infiltration routes in the Seven Mountains area. Now, Basw had all Cambodians in it, except for the Vietnamese Special Forces A team, which was in charge. Now, one of the things I did there at Basw was we had I was also, besides the demolition sergeant, I was the 4-deuce mortar man for that camp. And we didn't have any set areas that we had fire missions for. So what I wanted to do was I got in touch with the people at the outpost that was at Bachuk, which was at the base of one of the Seven Mountains. And it got fired at a lot by the Viet Cong. So I set up some firing patterns in the area and I wrote them all down. And what I did was I found out from Bachuk where the usual places were that the Viet Cong attacked from. And those were what I made firing missions for. So I had these all written down. One evening, the Viet Cong attacked Bachuk. I found out from radio communications where they had attacked from. It was one of the areas that I had set up for my mortar. So I immediately fired the first round. And they said that it was right on target. So I continued firing one after another. And later I found out that I had apparently killed a lot of the VC and broken up their attack. Now, during that time, I had in fact put so many rounds in that mortar that it overheated. And one of my rounds lit before it reached the bottom of the mortar. And it kind of just fizzled out of the mortar and landed inside the camp, but it didn't blow up. So we had to stop firing at that time and give it time to cool off because I had put too many rounds in there at one time. Now, after that, it was time for me to go home. Smitty, who had been the radio operator at the B team, made a a decision to send jeeps down to Basw to take me to the C team and continue on to or to the B team, I mean, and continue on to the C team. What happened was halfway between Basw and the B team, we ran across some mortars in the road that were set up as booby traps. So we didn't dare go on. So Smitty sent some jeeps down from the B team to meet us and take us on to the B team. And then the following day, we went to the C team on trucks via difficult roads. I managed to pick the truck that had the most sandbags on the bottom of it. So if we hit a booby trap in the road, I at least wouldn't be killed, maybe just wounded. We finally got to the C team and we managed to close the NCO club there several nights in a row until finally the C team told us we needed to leave there to finish our signing out from the fifth group. So we went to Saigon. And needless to say, Camp Goodman was there with its great bar. We stayed there for a few days until they finally got tired of us and told us we needed to go up to Nha Trang to sign out of fifth group. So we went to Nha Trang. The second night we were there, Nha Trang was hit by Viet Cong, and it was mortared pretty heavily, but no people killed. But we all had to go as soon as the firing hit. We woke up and we went out to our positions, our defensive positions, wearing just our shorts. What a sight we were. And then when the attack was over, we had to keep half of the people out there. So I got to stay out there the rest of the morning just wearing my shorts. And the next day, we closed the bar again. And again, headquarters told us we needed to get out of there. So we finally flew down to Saigon, got scheduled for a trip home, and went back to the States. And that's pretty much all there is.
Wow, that I mean, I know we've already gotten comments saying they it's nail biting listening to you uh tell all of this. And I've got some photos, but we've got a few questions right here that deal with what you were just speaking about. And Sergeant 11B was curious, did y'all end up finding the two POWs?
No, the POWs were, if I remember correctly, they were finally released and unharmed. So
Thank
that was a
goodness.
good thing.
Absolutely. Wow. Thank goodness.
Yeah.
EM, EM joining us today. He said, I've stood the wall during incoming in my underwear, untied boots, and kit as well.
Yep. Yeah, it was
But
something that happened a lot over in Vietnam.
oh yeah, I'm reading books about guys, not only at A camps but at CCN where they're literally running out in their uh, cut off tiger stripes boots and their web gear out there. Just
Yeah.
unbelievable. Folks are curious about the floods and the cat or the y'all getting them air qualified. The civet, was it the cat
Oh,
or the,
there he is.
and there's y'all's blanket, I think you were mentioning.
That's the blanket.
That is, I believe I've got one of the complete tower. Let me there were a few in that little, oh, this must be either pre or y'all getting him ready or he'd already completed one. I like y'all's
That
little
was when he was completed and when he was pinned with his parachute to
that
become a
is
paratrooper.
that is absolutely, and somebody snapping a picture over here. I love that. That is, I loved you guys getting y'all's animals jump qualified. That's some of the funniest stuff I've ever heard in my life. Um,
Yeah, special forces tended to do that. In fact, in when I was in training group, one of the guys had a boa constrictor as a pet, and he would jump with a boa constrictor around his waist, making that boa constrictor airborne qualified.
holy, I mean, it's no shortage of in Vietnam. You got the Ravens with their bears over there that drink beer. The
Oh yeah,
SF men with their snakes and their boas or dogs. It's Absolutely amazing, y'all's animal
We
stories.
had a lot of pets in Vietnam. In fact, at one of the camps at Kai Kai, in fact, we had, there it is. That's our fat dog. That's our pet uh, hawk
Yeah.
that never left the team room. And we also had a pet otter at the same time that found our team room during the floods and just swam around on the floor.
And guys, to show y'all how bad the flood is, I've got several pictures, but one of my favorites of the flood photos is there's a gentleman. It's so bad he's on the front door or porch of his hooch with his broom buster out
That's
there.
Sergeant Hunter. That's our medic. He was fishing.
Look at that, guys. I mean, and some of the others are way worse than this. And so there's a question coming up, but I wanted to show just exactly what y'all were living in. I mean, it's a nightmare. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
having to use boats to get to the mortar and the bunkers over here. I mean,
Yeah. It was something else.
did y'all have
When they have
considering?
monsoons over there, they have monsoons.
Uh, oh
It
yeah.
rains, it pours.
Did y'all have issues with uh snakes coming in off the rivers, gators, and any
Oh, yeah.
foul? Oh, that's what I was
Yep.
thinking with that overflow from that river. I'm sure y'all had to be
Yeah.
careful.
In fact,
Get
our first commander at Vinja, he had a BB gun, and he would shoot the snakes as they came up to the door.
a
That
brave
was at
man
Vinja,
with a BB
and
gun.
that mountain is in Cambodia.
That was one thing I wanted to show people not realizing just how close you guys are to the border. Well, let me show this because this is a good base defense photo of y'all in the old triangle right here on the river, so you can see why it floods so bad, guys. I mean, this is just
Yeah,
a
that was
nightmare,
Kai Kai.
and you guys aren't going to believe. You saw the map a minute ago that I showed how close they are to Cambodia. Here's one that Daniel made for me. Um, here is Kai Kai right here. But Cambodian outposts right here, Vietnam, they are literally, I mean, you could easily lob mortars, shoot into Cambodia right here. I mean,
Yeah, that was a couple. We were about 2,000 yards away from the Cambodian outpost.
Y'all had to be on your P's and Q's and watching for people probing being that close. I mean, that had to be
Yeah,
pretty dadgum scary. And there's
yeah,
one last
that Kai
map.
Kai was at one of the major areas that the Viet Cong would infiltrate Vietnam from.
There we go. There's Kai Kai right here, and
Yeah,
there's the border again, just for y'all to get a physical look at it right here. I mean, whew, you floods, animals, and right there on the border with Cambodia. Uh, uh.
yeah.
Um, we've got a few questions right here. Kyle, thank you very much for that, man. Thank you. Um, 3 stars is wondering, did the weather seeding program they used to make the man-made monsoon season, how did that affect airborne jumps? My uncle Gino Goggles jumped into Vietnam and got hurt. I think one of the few airborne jumps. Conventional wise, yeah, special forces made a lot of airborne jumps. But to the
Oh,
question,
yeah. We did not use weather seeding in Mekong Delta
mm,
because we already got enough monsoons there. we got it plenty of rain without the seeding.
Yeah, they I think they were trying to do most of that stuff on the Ho Chi Minh Trail to kind of bog it down and flood it
Yeah,
out, if I remember correctly.
right.
Yeah. Oh, you were speaking about the four deuce, and maybe you can explain the difference between a 81 and a four deuce, and how much the power
That's
difference
an
on a.
81 millimeter
Oh, that's an
mortar
81.
right
Okay.
there. Yeah, the four deuce is 4.2 inches, and that's a lot larger than that one.
Oh yeah, it's I've there was one at the old fire base where a saw group was a CCN team was working, and they got low on ammunition and grenades and all that, and somehow happened upon an old four deuce, and there were still rounds at the fire base, and that was literally the only thing that kept them from being overrun that afternoon.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. The four deuce and the 81 were good weapons.
And the four deuce has the whole ensemble of HE, white phosphorus, and all of that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. EM, great question. How much of the capacity were you able to defeat on the waterways with SEALs and riverboat guys of the Navy?
They were never where I was. Uh, Although we did get some boats into Kai Kai, but it was after I was there, and because of the fact that the river ran into Cambodia, we were not able to get the boats would not be able to travel through the Kai Kai River and to any place in Vietnam. It flowed into Cambodia from Vietnam rather than. So what they did was they airlifted the boats into uh, Kai Kai, but we never had any of those boats until later in the Fourth Corps down by Vinja.
Uh, I've recently been reading up on the seals, and there, and we actually had a Seawolf guest on not I think last Friday, and boy, they had a rough time in the Delta as well. That, yeah, all of y'all in the Delta, I that just seems like it was a, a nightmare. As if Vietnam isn't bad enough, y'all are down there in the mud, the mosquitoes, and monsoon season affecting y'all like crazy. Um,
In fact, the monsoon, you could see a black wall coming towards the camp when the monsoon came towards us. That's at
oh,
Vinja there.
okay.
And that's the barge that we used.
Okay, I was about to say that looks like a heck of a troop carrier right there.
Oh
Looks like
yeah.
an old. Is that that looks like an old 30 or a 50? I can't tell what that is up there on
It's 30 caliber.
30 caliber. Okay. Wow. And that's actually one of the next questions we've got. Jason's curious about seeing many pictures of the tiny CIDG guys with the BARs. What kind of weapons were you guys using while around the CIDG, excuse me, guys?
Weapons we had were the M79 uh, for grenade and 50 calibers, BARs, 30 caliber machine guns, and the main weapon we had was M16s as well as 45 caliber pistol. That's what we carried when we went on patrols. except and one guy would generally have the M79.
We've kind of I've seen a few pictures, especially in the early days. Were any of you guys partial to taking out the any type of shotgun, a combat shotgun, a pump shotgun, or is that going to be too much trouble in the Delta?
Oh yeah, I don't remember us having a shotgun. I had now Kai Kai. I had a oh shoot, a Thompson submachine gun,
Oh yeah,
and I kept that in my room. It didn't have a stock on it. I kept it in my room because I, for a while there, I was the FDC, fire direction control, in my room without a guard on the outside of the team house. So when I was acting as FDC, I always had that Thompson submachine gun on my lap, ready to turn it towards the door if somebody tried coming in.
think. Gosh, I think I had a picture of that Thompson, and of course now I won't be able to
You
find
probably
it. But
do on the wall.
yes, sir. And that did you I mean, I've heard some guys taking it out and they immediately regret. They were like, "Oh, I saw WW2 and the John Wayne carrying his and thought I was going to be cool and I did not
Yeah,
realize A how heavy the weapon was, but how heavy toting around stick mags of Thompson 40 whatchamacallit bullets."
45.
45, yes, sir.
Thompson
God, I had a
Thompson
brain fart.
45, yeah.
Did
Yeah,
you did
and
you
when
have the
you talk
stick mags or were you
BARs, the BARs looked massive when the Vietnamese carried them, but they carried them.
that's what has been so surprising, especially when Jason on his Twitter X, whatever you want to call it, he posts them. It's like a little kid with his first deer rifle or something going out there. It's like,
Yeah,
good Lord, I don't understand how they hold them, much less fire those beasts, firing
yeah.
30-06
And
rounds out, or is it
and
308
by the way,
rounds?
when I mentioned about Son being our trusted quote unquote interpreter, I was told later that they found out that he has been a Viet Cong infiltrator and he was our chief interpreter. And it makes me wonder when I was up there on the border and when our CO was killed and the Vietnamese ran, I was wondering after I heard about him becoming found out to be a Viet Cong, if in fact he had told the Vietnamese CIDG that I said to run.
Um, I
I never
see.
found out.
I see why you guys it was so iffy around them and why the Vietnamese, I mean the American special forces kind of always felt hinky around them unless around the yards and stuff because God,
Yeah,
I've heard some
we
just
always
horror
had to watch our
stories.
backs.
Mm. Sleep with one eye open. I mean, out there.
Yeah, yeah, and in fact, when I was at Basw, that was my last camp. When I was only there for a month, when I mentioned about the soldiers being Cambodian and the camp commander was a Vietnamese captain. And they also made the mistake of making the Cambodian commander a captain. And one time, our CO got in an argument with the Viet Cong, I mean the Vietnamese CO, and the Cambodian CO came up after the fight and said, "You want him dead?" And they would have done it. They would have killed the CIDG commander had we said to do it.
Wow.
The
That
Cambodians hated Vietnamese.
oh, I mean, it's honestly, well, it's not considering how they were treated, but it's just surprising to hear the hatred the Cambode troops used by y'all or SOG and the Yards absolutely despised all of the Vietnamese.
Yeah.
And they
Yep.
would they'd kill them at a heart in a heartbeat if y'all said
Oh,
the
yeah.
word.
Yep.
EM had a question, I think. Oh yes, EM. Sorry about that. Does this mean the SEALs and the riverine boats did not have much operational or con plan operational effect in the Cambodian Laos areas?
Laos, I'm not sure about, but I and I'm not sure about the SEALs. The SEALs I know were in the area, but they weren't in our area. They were probably all on the Mekong River rather than where I was. Although
A
some of them might have come on the Vente Canal, which went by Vinja, but they weren't there when I was there.
and I don't want to speak out of school. We'll have a SEAL vet and historian on Friday, but the SEALs were, as Mr. Dick said, on the waterways working and in the sloughs working, but they also had a lot of deadly and important operations in near the Yumen Forest and as well as the Rung Sat Special Zone. Very interesting and deadly place. If y'all have not heard of that, look that up. But we'll be speaking about it Friday. But as far as I know, uh, no SEALs were going into Cambodia, and as far as I know, no SEALs made it north to go to Laos unless they were switched like the early SEALs at Kontum at CCC. That was way out of their scope of things. And a matter of fact, a few went into I-Corps and quickly realized this was not the area for a SEAL team to be operating. So they left that to Force Recon and Special Forces. Um, let's see here. Any more questions, guys? Um, Larry Thorny stuff. Oh, I've got a question. Speaking about considering all the places you went, where two questions with that. What was in your opinion? I mean, this is going to be hard considering it's combat no matter where you went. Where did you feel the most danger occurred for you in Vietnam? What area? What A camp? Where was the most dangerous in
Kai
your
Kai,
opinion? Kai Kai.
Kai Kai for sure.
Any
Yep.
particular reason on that?
Because we were so close to Cambodia and that Cambodian outpost, because at Vinja we were just as close, but the Viet Cong weren't as strong there
Mhm.
because that was way south
Yeah.
in South Vietnam, whereas Kai Kai was a little bit north, and it was a heavily Viet Cong area.
So they were basically kind of what you're saying there is they were getting supplied a lot better than uh
Oh yeah,
the, than the other A camp were, and they were able to actually cause damage and harass y'all a little bit more.
yeah. In fact, we ran uh, med caps in Vinja, whereas there were no med caps run out of Kai Kai because the enemy was so close.
I mean that being so close and hearing y'all getting all the rockets and all of that, but also the fact that y'all have got infiltrators and y'all are having to watch y'all's back the way y'all are, it is just
Yeah.
that makes it just so much more deadly. And the piggyback to that question is considering like in the post I put this morning from one of your photos, and thank you again for allowing me to share your wonderful photos and your photo collections. But you had mentioned your group with Kai Kai and how tight and how well trained everybody was, and the benefits and the vital importance of an A team cross training and learning every aspect to where you can teach. Um, with your MOS, what did you learn in country around other Green Berets that you felt uh, helped you a lot going on after you learned that particular skill? And what was the hardest thing you found teaching while you were in country that you had learned, either your own MOS or helping teach something else?
Well, I actually had so many MOSs.
Yes, sir.
I I managed to get communications radio operator MOS, intelligence sergeant MOS, uh, demolition sergeant MOS, heavy weapons MOS. So I had four MOSs that were special forces MOSs, and that was so good to have for me. It meant that I could do so many jobs. Of course, it kept me pretty busy too. But being able to replace somebody, that's one of the things about special forces is we were trained well enough so that we could take somebody else's job. And in fact, when we went through training group, we were trained in well, actually, when we got to group, we were trained in two other MOSs so that we were well to do three different jobs. That's where the three comes from, where we say we're cross trained and we get the three on our MOS because at that time we got a three at the end of our MOS and that meant cross trained in two other MOSs. So yeah, and I I did use my demolition MOS once in civilian life. When I was part of a nutcracker group putting on the nutcracker show. And I was made the gunner for that, for a part of it where they fire the cannon and out pops the oh yeah, the guy anyway pops out of the cannon, and because of my weapons and yeah, demolition expert part, I was able to load that cannon to fire it inside the theater and not hurt anybody, just make it a big white cloud, and out pops the nutcracker. And the people that year that I did that, the people that were working with me said that was the first time they had ever gone through a whole season of the Nutcracker without a misfire. So I was pretty proud of the job that I did there. I also, when I was a civilian, I tried to get a job as a on the bomb squad for the police department, but they said no, we only hire from within, and at that time there was a lot of people demonstrating against the war, and I was afraid that if I was a police officer, I'd use my baton on demonstrators. So, and I had, in fact, when I was a flight instructor, I had one of my students that worked with the sheriff's department in Alameda County, California, and his he hated those demonstrators also, and his supervisor would never let him go to Berkeley because he was afraid he'd use his baton on demonstrators.
That is wild. Um, gosh, there was something that just popped in my head about uh base defense. Oh, there was well, two things that came up. I've always been interested about the base defenses, and I think one of the maps we just showed had mentioned is it Fugu, Fuji, Fugu gas, or
What is
the
it?
the mixture that if the base is overloaded, it's basically an explosive napalm like container, like y'all had in 55-gallon drums. Fugas.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Oh shoot, what was it?
it
Flue
wasn't
gas.
napalm, was it mixed in there or
Flue gas. It was a mixture of gas and soap.
of soap? Okay, wow. Did y'all in any of your time at your A camps, did it ever get bad enough to where y'all had to blow it off like in the Green Beret movies to where?
No,
Oh, thank
never
goodness.
had to
Thank.
do it. Although some camps did.
Oh, yeah. I mean, is that considering what it's made of? I can only assume it works quite well
Hmm.
when you've got to use it.
Yeah, yeah. It was used for both illumination as well as killing.
Man, um, we'll let some questions come in. Actually, there's one before I ask mine, and we'll see if any more come in. But EM was curious. I put a little list together, even though mine are just random. He's asking of those still alive, which Green Berets of the era should we hear the stories of, not only related to Vietnam, but of the Cold War years and after, in your opinion?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when I first went through Special Forces training, it was all considering the fact that Russia would be our enemy. We never considered anybody else. It was always Russia. And in fact, when I went through the Sodom training, the special atomic demolition munitions, that one was targeted for Russia. And even though we all considered it to be a suicide mission, because what we were supposed to do was go behind enemy lines and set up the Sodom where it would explode and damage something important in that foreign country. And we were supposed to stay with that Sodom until it exploded to make sure that nobody took it off or messed with it. And so we considered it to be a one-way mission because we'd have to remain within the area where it would do damage.
And is that what the one you were training with looked like here, the backpack one, or was it the
Yeah.
big one between your
Yeah. In
legs?
fact, it was known as the backpack nuke.
I mean, how vigorous? I mean, I bet you jumped through hoops to be able to even be able to get around this thing. security clearance wise.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, all it took was a secret clearance, not a top secret.
Wow.
I didn't get top secret until later on when what was it? I forget. It was before I went to Vietnam, though, that I got my top secret clearance.
I wonder when that was. January 16. That's telling the story. Wow. So where was this with at Fort Bragg training, or
It was
when was
Fort
this?
Bragg,
Fort
and
Bragg?
in fact, it was they had one building for the training, and there was barbed wire around that building. There was also a security guard at the entrance to the building to check IDs and make sure that nobody got in who didn't have an ID that was okayed on the list that he held. And we did all our training inside that building, and we were able to take notes, but the notes could never leave the building. So after they were used, they were burned.
It says here, January 14th, I had just received my secret security clearance. Shortly thereafter, during a break in pre deployment training, I was told I'd be receiving additional training. Being a demolition
Yeah,
expert, I was selected to participate in the secret code-named project known as Green Light.
yeah,
Wow, that is amazing. And as I
yeah.
mentioned
I was never
offline,
put on a. They had green light teams. In fact, most of the green light teams were in Berlin,
mm-hmm.
and they were there so that they would be close to the Russian border and be able to get across the border and do their thing.
When the balloon goes up, go ahead and get everything ready and rock and roll.
Yeah.
Boy, that, like you
And it
said,
took
that really
took
took.
two men to operate it. Each man had his own code. You
Oh,
had to put two codes into that Sodom to make it go off.
so nobody could get wild and potentially
Yeah,
steal a backpack nuke.
right.
Man, oh man. That how long did that consist of? How long were you in the project until you went on to Ethiopia?
Uh,
Or
it was about I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks.
in those 3 or 4 weeks, was every jump with a simulated device? Did you ever jump with a real
We
device?
never jumped with them.
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay,
that wasn't part of the training for us.
okay. Boy,
The green light
that's
teams, I'm sure,
mm,
trained jumping with it,
mhm.
but we didn't. We just knew how to operate them.
Yeah. Some of those dead A guys speak about some of the green light teams over there, and that is,
Yeah,
as you said, a very high probability. That's a one way mission. Um,
yeah,
and scary as hell to think about. Well, guys, we quickly made the 2 hour mark, and we can always, as y'all can tell, with Mister Dick's vast experiences in special forces, we can have him back at any time to come back. Uh, is is anybody well, we've hit our question quota here. Do you have anything else you'd like to share with us before we close out for the day, Mr. Dick?
not that I can think of. I think I
Okay.
pretty much covered it.
Well, we can just put a pin in it until you return the next time. No sense in saying goodbye since we'll have you back. So um
Okay.
I'll be getting this up, and guys, if y'all have any questions or anything, get them to me, and I'll get them to Mr. Dick. Or again, please follow his Facebook or send him requests. I'll put his Facebook link down in the show notes underneath the like and subscribe portion, and please follow him. He's got great stories, great photos, and please go buy his books, I should say. Amazing reading. I can't wait to get mine in and immediately start them. So, you guys have a wonderful afternoon, evening, and we've got a big week Friday and Mr. Dick or day Friday. And Mr. Dick, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a honor and a pleasure getting to hear from you again. And I will be in touch with you, and we'll keep a lookout on the numbers and see when we can get you back.
Sounds good.
Excellent. You have a good evening, and I will see you later and see you guys later.
Okay, take care. Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.